The dust from the stagecoach settled around Penelope Foster's worn boots as she stepped onto the wooden platform of Parowan, Utah, her heart heavy with the weight of expectations that had driven her from Boston to this untamed corner of the West in the spring of 1878. She had spent the last 3 years at Miss Hartwell's Academy for Young Ladies, where they had scrubbed away every trace of her childhood, every memory of her mother's Apache blood, until she could barely remember the lullabies sung in a language that once felt like home. The letter from her father had been brief and cold, informing her that it was time to return and make a suitable match with one of the respectable ranchers in the territory, that her education was complete and she was now properly civilized. Penelope touched the silver cross at her throat, the one the headmistress had given her upon graduation, and felt the absence of the turquoise pendant her grandmother had tied around her neck when she was just a girl. That pendant had been confiscated her first week at the academy, deemed too savage for a young lady seeking refinement. "Miss Foster?" A man in a crisp suit approached, his mustache waxed to sharp points. "I'm Edmund Carlyle, your father's business associate. He asked me to collect you and bring you to the ranch." Penelope nodded, smoothing down her traveling dress, painfully aware of how the corset constricted her breathing. Everything about her current life felt constricting, from the high collar that chafed her neck to the expectations that pressed down on her shoulders like iron shackles. The wagon ride to her father's ranch took them through Red Rock country, the landscape so achingly familiar it made her chest tighten. She remembered riding through these canyons as a child, her mother pointing out the plants used for healing, the tracks of animals, the stories written in stone and sky. But at the academy, she had learned to call those memories primitive, to be ashamed of the copper undertone of her skin, to straighten her dark hair until it hung limp and lifeless. Her father's ranch sprawled across a valley, prosperous and imposing. Thomas Foster had made his fortune in cattle and silver, and he had married a woman from the San Carlos Apache when he was young and idealistic. But Penelope's mother had died when she was 12, and her father had remarried within a year to a woman from Philadelphia who looked at Penelope like she was a stain that needed bleaching. Margaret Foster stood on the porch as the wagon approached, her blonde hair perfectly coiffed, her expression one of practiced civility. "Penelope, how wonderful to see you've returned. My, haven't they done wonders with you at that school?" The words felt like a slap, the implication clear. Penelope had needed fixing, refining, civilizing. She descended from the wagon, her legs unsteady after the long journey, and allowed her stepmother to air-kiss near her cheeks. "Your father is meeting with potential suitors this evening," Margaret continued, ushering her inside. "The Thornton boy is quite taken with the idea of you, and his family owns considerable land to the north. You'll want to make yourself presentable." Penelope's room had been redecorated in her absence, all traces of her childhood erased. The woven blankets her mother had made were gone, replaced with lace and chintz. The pottery her grandmother had given her had vanished. Even the drawings she had made as a child, depicting the stories her mother told, had been removed. The room belonged to a stranger, someone Penelope was supposed to become, but could never quite manage. That evening she sat stiffly in the parlor, while Harold Thornton droned on about his cattle operations and his views on properly managing a household. He barely looked at her, addressing most of his comments to her father, as if she were merely another asset to be acquired and managed. "Of course, I believe in proper Christian values," Harold said, his pale eyes finally landing on Penelope. "None of that savage nonsense that plagues these territories. A wife of mine would need to understand the importance of maintaining proper standards." Penelope's hands clenched in her lap, her nails digging into her palms. She smiled the way she had been taught at the academy, vacant and pleasant, while rage simmered beneath her carefully controlled expression. The next morning, desperate to escape the suffocating atmosphere of the ranch house, Penelope asked permission to ride into town. Margaret granted it reluctantly, insisting she take the buggy rather than ride horseback, which was deemed too unladylike. Parowan was a modest town, dusty and practical, built around a central square with a general store, a church, a saloon, and various other establishments necessary for frontier life. Penelope wandered the wooden sidewalks, feeling utterly lost despite being surrounded by the landscape of her childhood. She paused outside the general store when raised voices caught her attention. Through the window, she could see a weathered woman with kind eyes arguing with the proprietor. "I made these baskets fair and square, Mr. Henderson. You said you would pay me $3 for the lot." "That was before I realized what they were, Sarah," the man replied coldly. "I cannot have my store associated with Indian crafts. People want proper goods, not savage artifacts." The woman, Sarah, stood taller despite the insult. "These baskets are finer than anything you have on those shelves. My mother taught me the techniques passed down through generations." "Then perhaps you should have learned a more civilized trade," Henderson sneered. "Now please remove yourself and your wares from my establishment." Penelope found herself pushing through the door before she could think better of it. "I'll take them," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "All of them. How much?" Henderson looked startled, then calculating. "For you, Miss Foster, I will part with them for $5. "The woman said $3, Penelope replied firmly. "And I believe she should be the one receiving the payment, not you, since they are her creation." The silence that followed was thick with tension. Sarah looked at Penelope with surprise and something like recognition, while Henderson's face reddened with anger. But Penelope was Thomas Foster's daughter, and even he would not dare openly insult her. She counted out $3 from her small purse and handed them directly to Sarah, then gathered the beautiful woven baskets into her arms. They were exquisite, each one telling a story through its patterns and colors. Outside the store, Sarah touched Penelope's arm gently. "Thank you, child. That took courage." "It took nothing," Penelope said quietly. "You should not have been treated that way." Sarah studied her face carefully. "You are Thomas Foster's daughter, are you not? The one who went away to school?" Penelope nodded, suddenly unable to meet the woman's eyes. "I knew your mother," Sarah said softly. "She was my cousin. You have her eyes and her spirit, though I see they have tried to bury it deep." The words cracked something inside Penelope's carefully constructed walls. "They told me I should be ashamed," she whispered, "that everything about her, about that part of me, was wrong and savage and needed to be erased." Sarah's hand was warm on her cheek. "Your mother was one of the strongest, wisest women I ever knew. There is no shame in her blood, only honor. But you must find that truth for yourself, child. No one can give it to you." Before Penelope could respond, Sarah had disappeared into the crowd, leaving her standing alone on the sidewalk, with her arms full of baskets and her heart full of confusion. She was loading the baskets carefully into the buggy when a voice behind her made her turn. "Those are beautiful pieces. Sarah does remarkable work." The man standing there was tall and lean, with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of the summer sky. He wore dusty work clothes and a black Stetson, and there was something in the way he carried himself that spoke of quiet confidence rather than bravado. He could not have been much older than she was, perhaps 24 or 25. "You know her work?" Penelope asked. "I know her," he replied with a slight smile. "She is a friend. Name is Gideon Quaid. I run a small ranch about 10 miles west of here." "Penelope Foster," she said, accepting his extended hand. His grip was firm and warm, calloused from honest work. "Thomas Foster's daughter," Gideon said, recognition dawning. "I heard you had returned from back east. How are you finding Utah after Boston?" There was no judgment in his tone, only genuine curiosity. Penelope found herself relaxing slightly. "Different," she said carefully. "Everything is different." "I imagine so," Gideon said. "Though I suspect you remember more than you let on. Sarah mentioned once that you used to run these canyons like a wild deer when you were young." The image made Penelope smile despite herself. "That was a long time ago. I was a child." "Being grown does not mean forgetting who you were," Gideon said quietly. Sometimes our childhood selves knew more truth than we learn in all the years after. Before Penelope could respond, a group of well-dressed townspeople approached, and she saw the shift in their expressions when they noticed her speaking with Gideon. Mrs. Whitmore, the banker's wife, sniffed disapprovingly. Miss Foster, I am surprised to see you associating with Mr. Quaid. Your father has such high hopes for your social standing. Gideon tipped his hat politely. Good day, Mrs. Whitmore. I was just admiring Miss Foster's excellent taste in basket work. He turned back to Penelope. It was a pleasure meeting you, Miss Foster. I hope you will find what you are looking for here. He walked away with an easy stride, and Penelope found herself watching him go, intrigued by his words and the way he had treated her like a person rather than a possession. That man, Mrs. Whitmore said sharply, is not suitable company. He associates with the wrong sort of people, if you understand my meaning. Your stepmother would be horrified. Penelope understood perfectly. Gideon Quaid was the wrong sort because he did not share the prejudices that governed polite society. She gathered her skirts and climbed into the buggy without responding, but Mrs. Whitmore's words echoed in her mind. That evening at dinner, Margaret made several pointed comments about proper behavior and suitable associations. Harold Thornton was coming to call again on Sunday, and Penelope was expected to encourage his attentions. He is a good match, her father said gruffly. Solid prospects. You could do far worse. I could also do better, Penelope replied quietly, surprising herself. Her father's fork clattered against his plate. You will not speak that way, Penelope. I have invested considerable money in your education and refinement. You will make a suitable match that reflects well on this family. You mean a match that makes people forget my mother, Penelope said, her voice sharper now. A match that erases the part of me you find embarrassing. That is enough, Thomas roared, standing from the table. Your mother is dead, and you would do well to remember that. I will not have you behaving like some uncivilized savage after all the effort I have put into making you presentable. The words landed like blows, each one carefully aimed to shame and diminish. Penelope stood as well, her napkin falling to the floor. My mother deserves better than to be erased from memory. She deserves honor, not shame. She left the dining room before they could respond, her heart pounding in her chest. In her sterile bedroom, she unpacked one of Sarah's baskets and ran her fingers over the intricate patterns, remembering dimly how her mother had tried to teach her these same designs before she died. Sleep would not come that night. Penelope lay awake, wrestling with the conflict between what she had been taught to be and what she felt stirring inside her, some long-buried part of herself demanding recognition. The next day was Sunday, and Harold Thornton arrived precisely at 2:00, his clothes immaculate and his manner presumptuous. He sat in the parlor and talked at length about his plans for expansion, his views on proper household management, and his expectations for a wife. I believe in order and civilization, he said pompously. The Indian problem is nearly solved, thank goodness, and we can finally build proper society out here. A man's wife should reflect his values. Penelope felt something inside her snap. And what if a woman has values of her own? Harold blinked, clearly taken aback by the question. Well, naturally, a woman defers to her husband's superior judgment in such matters. Naturally, Penelope echoed, her tone flat. After Harold left, thoroughly pleased with himself and oblivious to Penelope's barely concealed contempt, Margaret cornered her in the hallway. You will accept his proposal when it comes, Margaret said coldly. Your father and I will not tolerate any defiance. You have been given every advantage, and you will not throw it away with stubborn pride. The advantages of shame? Penelope asked. The advantages of denying half of who I am? That half is nothing to be proud of, Margaret hissed. Your mother was a mistake your father made in his youth, and you are the unfortunate reminder. But we have done our best to fix that, and you will not undo all our work with foolish sentimentality. The casual cruelty of the words left Penelope breathless. She retreated to her room, packed a small bag with essentials, and waited until the household was asleep. Then she slipped out through her window, mounted one of the horses in the stable, and rode into the darkness. She had no plan, no destination. She only knew she could not spend another moment in that house, suffocating under the weight of their expectations and their shame. The horse carried her through the moonlit landscape, and she let instinct guide her toward the canyons she had explored as a child. Dawn found her at the edge of a red rock formation, the horse grazing peacefully while she sat on a boulder and watched the sun paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The beauty of it made her chest ache with a longing she could barely name. Beautiful sunrise! Penelope startled, turning to find Gideon Quaid approaching on foot, leading his own horse. He did not look surprised to find her there. "Are you following me?" she asked, more curious than alarmed. "This is my land," he replied mildly. "My ranch is just over that ridge, but I did see you ride past about 3 hours ago and thought I should check that you were all right." "I needed to leave," Penelope said simply. "I could not stay there another moment." Gideon nodded and settled onto a nearby rock, giving her space but offering his presence. "I heard Harold Thornton was calling on you. My condolences." Despite everything, Penelope laughed. The sound startled her, rusty and unpracticed. "He is exactly what my father wants for me. Respectable, proper, completely intolerable." "Those qualities do often go together," Gideon agreed. "What do you want for yourself?" No one had asked her that question in 3 years. Penelope found she did not have a ready answer. "I do not know anymore," she admitted quietly. "I used to know who I was, but they took that girl and reshaped her into someone I barely recognize. And now I do not know how to find my way back." "Maybe you are not meant to go back," Gideon said thoughtfully. "Maybe you are meant to go forward, taking the best of both worlds with you." "They made me ashamed," Penelope whispered, the confession torn from somewhere deep inside. "My mother, her people, everything she taught me. At the academy, they told me it was savage and wrong. They made me feel like I had to bury that part of myself to be worthy of respect." Gideon was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was gentle but firm. "Your mother's people survived in this harsh land for thousands of years through wisdom, courage, and deep knowledge. There is no shame in that. The shame belongs to those who cannot see the value in traditions different from their own." "You speak as if you know something about it," Penelope observed. "My mother was Paiute," Gideon said simply. "My father was a rancher from Texas. I grew up between two worlds, and I learned early that the people who demanded I choose one over the other were usually the ones most afraid of their own ignorance." Penelope looked at him with new understanding. His features, now that she studied them, showed the blend of heritages, though his skin was lighter than hers. "How did you bear it?" "The judgment, the expectations." "I stopped trying to please people who would never be satisfied," Gideon said. "I built my own life on my own terms. It was not easy, and I am not as prosperous as I might be if I played their games, but I can look at myself in the mirror without shame, and that is worth more than all their approval." The sun had fully risen now, bathing the canyon in warm light. Penelope felt something loosening in her chest, some tight knot of pain beginning to unravel. "Would you like to see something?" Gideon asked, standing and offering his hand. Penelope hesitated only a moment before accepting. His hand was warm and steady, and he helped her to her feet with natural courtesy. They mounted their horses and rode deeper into the canyon, following a narrow trail that wound between towering red walls. After about 20 minutes, they emerged into a hidden valley where a small spring created a pool of clear water surrounded by cottonwood trees. The place felt sacred, untouched by the complications of the outside world. "My mother brought me here when I was young," Gideon said. "She told me this was a place of healing, where the spirits of the ancestors watched over their descendants. I do not know if that is true, but I know this place has always brought me peace when I needed it." Penelope dismounted and walked to the water's edge. She could feel something in this place, some quality of stillness and acceptance. She knelt by the pool and saw her reflection staring back at her. For the first time in years, she did not look away from the copper tones of her skin or the dark thickness of her hair. She looked at herself and tried to see what her mother would have seen. "Sarah told me I have my mother's eyes," she said softly. Gideon crouched beside her. "Then you have eyes that saw beauty in hard places and strength that endured." "I barely remember her teachings," Penelope admitted. "They faded so quickly at the academy, like dreams I could not quite hold on to." "Memories can return when we are ready to receive them," Gideon said. "And Sarah could help if you wanted. She remembers." The offer hung in the air between them, full of possibility and risk. To seek out those memories would be to defy everything her father and stepmother demanded of her. It would be to claim the heritage they wanted her to deny. "Why are you helping me?" Penelope asked, turning to look at Gideon directly. "You barely know me." "I know what it is like to be caught between two worlds," Gideon said. "And I know what it cost me to deny part of myself to please others. I would not wish that on anyone, especially someone with your spirit." "My spirit?" Penelope asked. "You have only just met me. You do not know what spirit I have." "I saw you stand up to Henderson in his own store," Gideon said. "I saw you defend Sarah when it would have been easier to walk away. I see you now, having fled a life that was suffocating you even though you have nowhere else to go. That takes spirit." Penelope felt heat rise in her cheeks, but it was not from shame. Gideon's words made her feel seen in a way she had not experienced in years. "My father will be looking for me," she said practically. "I cannot hide here forever." "No," Gideon agreed. "But you can take time to think about what you truly want before you go back. My ranch is just over that ridge. My housekeeper, Mrs. Chin, keeps a guest room ready. You would be welcome to stay until you sort things out." The offer was generous and probably improper, but Penelope found she did not care about propriety anymore. Propriety had nearly destroyed her. "I would like that," she said. "Thank you." They rode to Gideon's ranch, a modest but well-maintained property with a sturdy house, a barn, and corrals holding several fine horses. It was nothing like the sprawling empire her father commanded, but there was something honest and welcoming about it. Mrs. Chin, a Chinese woman with silver threading through her black hair, greeted them with practical efficiency. She showed no surprise at Penelope's unexpected arrival, simply nodding and preparing the guest room while insisting Penelope eat something after her long night. The guest room was simple but comfortable, and after a meal of eggs and fresh bread, Penelope slept more deeply than she had in years. When she woke, the sun was already sliding toward the western horizon. She had slept the entire day. She found Gideon in the barn, tending to his horses. He looked up when she entered, brushing hay from his shirt. "Feeling better?" "I feel like I have been carrying something heavy for years, and finally set it down," Penelope admitted. "Good," Gideon said. "Sarah is coming for dinner. Mrs. Chin invited her. I hope that is all right with you." Penelope's heart skipped, nervous and eager at once. "Yes, I would like that." That evening, sitting around Gideon's simple wooden table with Sarah, Mrs. Chin, and Gideon himself, Penelope felt more at home than she had in her father's grand house. The conversation flowed easily, and when Sarah began telling stories of Penelope's mother, the memories came flooding back. "Your mother could track anything," Sarah said, her eyes distant with remembering. "She knew every plant that grew in these canyons and what each one could do. She was training to be a healer when she met your father." "I remember her making medicines," Penelope said slowly. "There was a paste she made for burns and a tea for fevers. She tried to teach you," Sarah said gently. "But you were young when she died, and your father would not let me continue the lessons." "Could you teach me now?" Penelope asked, the words coming out in a rush. "I know it has been years, but could you help me remember?" Sarah's smile was like sunshine breaking through clouds. I would be honored, child. Your mother would be so proud to see you seeking this knowledge. Over the next several days, while her father's men surely searched the territory for her, Penelope began a different kind of education. Sarah came each morning, and they walked the canyons together, identifying plants and learning their uses. Penelope's hands, so carefully softened at the academy, grew calloused again as she worked with roots and stems and leaves. Gideon often accompanied them, sometimes offering his own knowledge, sometimes simply providing his steady presence. Penelope found herself increasingly aware of him, the way he moved with quiet confidence, the intelligence in his eyes, the kindness in his manner. One afternoon, as they rested by a stream, Gideon taught her to track rabbit prints in the soft earth. His hand covered hers, guiding her fingers along the marks, and Penelope felt something spark between them, a connection that went beyond simple attraction. "You are a good teacher," she said softly. "You are a good student," Gideon replied, but he did not move his hand away. "You learn quickly because this knowledge is already in your blood. You are just remembering what you always knew." "I feel like I am becoming someone new," Penelope admitted. "Or maybe someone I was always meant to be." "You are finding your way back to yourself," Gideon said. "That is the bravest thing a person can do." That night, unable to sleep, Penelope sat on the porch of the guest house and stared at the star-filled sky. She heard footsteps and turned to find Gideon approaching with 2 cups of coffee. "Mrs. Chen made it before she went to bed," he said, offering her a cup. "Thought you might want some." "Thank you," Penelope said, accepting the warm mug gratefully. Gideon settled onto the porch step beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him in the cool night air. "What has you awake?" "Everything," Penelope said honestly. "I keep thinking about what happens next. I cannot stay here forever, hiding from my father, but I cannot go back to being who they wanted me to be." "Then do not," Gideon said simply. "Be who you are and let them adjust." "It is not that simple," Penelope protested. "My father has power and influence. He can make my life very difficult if I defy him." "He already made your life difficult by trying to erase half of who you are," Gideon pointed out. "At least if you stand up to him, you will have your dignity and your truth." Penelope sipped her coffee, letting the bitter warmth ground her. "How did you do it? How did you build this life when people must have fought you every step?" "I had help," Gideon said. "My mother's people taught me skills that served me well. I learned ranching from my father, even though he never quite knew what to do with a half-breed son. And I found people like Mrs. Chen and Sarah who judged me by my character rather than my bloodline. It was not easy, but it was worth it." "Do you ever wish you could have both?" Penelope asked. "The acceptance of proper society and the freedom to be yourself?" "Every day," Gideon admitted. "But I have learned that some people will never accept you no matter how you bend yourself to fit their expectations. And the cost of that bending is too high. You lose yourself trying to become what they want. And in the end, they still find reasons to reject you." His words resonated in Penelope's chest like a bell. She had lost herself, had let them reshape her into something palatable, and it still had not been enough. Harold Thornton and people like him would always see the taint of her mother's blood, no matter how refined her manners or proper her dress. "I am afraid," she whispered into the darkness. "Of what?" Gideon asked gently. "Of failing, of not being strong enough to stand against them, of being alone." Gideon was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was low and sincere. "You are already stronger than you know, Penelope. You left everything familiar to find yourself. That takes courage most people never discover. And you would not be alone. Sarah would stand with you. Mrs. Chen would stand with you. I would stand with you." Penelope turned to look at him, searching his face in the moonlight. "Why would you do that? Risk your own standing to support someone you barely know?" "Because I know what it is to need someone to stand with you," Gideon said. And because the more I know you, the more I see someone worth standing beside. The air between them felt charged with possibility. Penelope found herself leaning slightly closer, drawn by something she did not fully understand but did not want to resist. Gideon, she began, but she did not know how to finish the sentence. He smiled, his eyes warm. It is late, you should try to rest. Tomorrow, Sarah wants to show you the place where your mother gathered herbs for her strongest medicines. Penelope nodded, though rest felt impossible with her heart racing as it was. She stood, and Gideon stood with her. For a moment they simply looked at each other, and Penelope felt the world narrow to just the two of them, standing in the moonlight with the vast Utah sky overhead. "Good night, Penelope," Gideon said softly. "Good night," she managed, and retreated to her room before she could do something foolish like kiss him. The next morning dawned clear and warm. Sarah arrived early, her face grave. "There are men in town asking about you," she said without preamble. "Your father's men. They are searching the ranches." Penelope felt her brief moment of peace shatter. "I should go back," she said dully. "I cannot let Gideon suffer consequences for sheltering me." "No," Gideon said firmly. "You will not go back until you are ready. Let them search. You are a grown woman, free to go where you please." "The law might not see it that way," Penelope said. "I am unmarried and under my father's authority." "Then perhaps it is time to change that," Sarah said, looking between Penelope and Gideon with knowing eyes. Penelope felt her cheeks flame. "I cannot ask Gideon to marry me simply to escape my father. That would not be fair to him." "You did not ask," Gideon said quietly. "But if you would consider it, I would be honored to offer you both protection and partnership." The world seemed to stop spinning. Penelope stared at Gideon, trying to determine if he was serious. His eyes were steady and sincere. "You barely know me," she whispered. "I know enough," Gideon said. "I know you are brave and kind, and seeking to honor your heritage. I know you defended Sarah when it would have been easier to look away. I know you learn quickly and work hard. I know that when I am with you, I feel like the best version of myself. That is enough to build on." "But marriage," Penelope said, her mind reeling, "that is permanent." "So is denying who you are to please your father," Gideon pointed out. "At least marriage to me would give you freedom to discover who you want to be." Sarah touched Penelope's arm. "Your mother married for love, and she never regretted it even though it cost her dearly. But she would not want you to marry without your heart's consent. Consider what you truly want, child, not what others demand of you." Penelope's heart was pounding so hard she could barely think. Marriage to Gideon would solve the immediate problem of her father's authority. But more than that, it would mean binding her life to a man who had shown her more respect and understanding in a handful of days than Harold Thornton had managed in hours of conversation. "Can I think about it?" she asked. "Of course," Gideon said. "I am not trying to pressure you. I only want you to know the offer stands." They spent the morning in the canyons despite the threat of discovery, and Sarah showed Penelope the hidden meadow where particular herbs grew that her mother had used in her most powerful healing work. As Penelope knelt in the grass, carefully harvesting the plants according to Sarah's instructions, she felt a peace settle over her. This was right. This work, this knowledge, this connection to her mother's legacy. This was what had been missing from her carefully constructed life at the academy. Not refinement or etiquette or the ability to pour tea at exactly the proper angle, but this deep connection to the land and the wisdom of those who had lived in harmony with it for generations. "Your mother would be so proud," Sarah said softly, watching Penelope work. "She wanted this for you, wanted you to carry forward what she had learned." "My father wanted me to forget all of it," Penelope said, her hands still working among the plants. "He wanted me to become someone who would bring him social standing and respectability." "Your father loved your mother in his way," Sarah said, But he was never strong enough to stand against the judgment of his peers. He chose their approval over honoring her memory, and that was his failing, not yours. I do not want to repeat his mistakes, Penelope said firmly. I do not want to deny who I am to make others comfortable. Then do not, Sarah said simply. The path will be harder, but it will be yours. They returned to the ranch as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. Gideon was waiting in the yard, and his expression was troubled. Your father is here, he said quietly. He arrived about 20 minutes ago. He is in the house with Mrs. Chin. Penelope's stomach clenched with fear, but she straightened her shoulders. Then I should face him. Gideon fell into step beside her, and Sarah followed. The three of them entered the house together, a united front. Thomas Foster stood in Gideon's simple living room, looking entirely out of place in his expensive suit and polished boots. His face was red with anger, but when he saw Penelope, relief flashed across his features before fury replaced it. Penelope! Thank God! I have been searching everywhere for you. What possessed you to run off in the middle of the night like some wild savage? The words that might once have made Penelope cringe now only strengthened her resolve. I left because I could no longer breathe in that house, Father. Every moment there was a denial of who I am. Who you are is my daughter, Thomas thundered, and you will return home immediately. Harold Thornton is prepared to overlook this scandalous behavior if we act quickly. I will not marry Harold Thornton, Penelope said clearly, and I will not return to a house where my mother's memory is treated with shame. Thomas's eyes narrowed. Your mother is dead, Penelope. You need to accept that and move forward with your life. I am moving forward, Penelope replied, but I will do so honoring her, not erasing her. Thomas's gaze shifted to Gideon, cold and calculating. You. I should have known. Quaid, is it? I have heard about you. Another half-breed thinking he can make something of himself. You have poisoned my daughter's mind with your savage sympathies. Your daughter's mind is her own, Gideon said evenly, though Penelope could see the tension in his jaw. I have done nothing but offer her shelter and respect. Respect, Thomas spat the word. You call it respect to encourage her to throw away everything I have worked to give her? 3 years of expensive education, connections to the best families, a future secured. A future you wanted, Penelope interjected. Not one I chose. You are 20 years old, and a woman, Thomas said dismissively. You are not equipped to make such choices. Then I will make them for her, Gideon said quietly, if she will have me. Thomas swung toward him, his face purpling with rage. You dare? I have asked Penelope to marry me, Gideon continued calmly. If she accepts, she will be under my protection, not yours, and you will have no say in how she chooses to live her life. The silence that followed was deafening. Thomas stared at Gideon as if he were a snake that had suddenly learned to speak. Then his gaze shifted to Penelope, searching her face. Is this true? You would throw away everything for this nobody? Penelope looked at Gideon, at his steady presence and the respect in his eyes. She thought of Harold Thornton's casual dismissal, her stepmother's cruelty, the endless pressure to deny half of herself. And she thought of the peace she had found in these past days, the reconnection to her mother's legacy, the sense of finally being seen for who she truly was. Yes, she said clearly. If Gideon will still have me, I accept his proposal. Gideon's face transformed with a smile that made Penelope's heart skip. Then it is settled. Thomas looked between them, and for a moment, Penelope saw something like grief in his eyes. But it hardened quickly back to anger. Then you are no longer my daughter. Do not come to me for help when this foolish decision leaves you destitute and outcast. I would rather be outcast and true to myself than comfortable and living a lie, Penelope said, and the words felt like freedom. Thomas turned on his heel and stormed from the house. They heard his horse thunder away, and then there was silence. "Are you all right?" Gideon asked gently. Penelope discovered she was trembling, but not from fear. "I think so. I think I am better than I have been in years." Sarah stepped forward and pulled Penelope into a warm embrace. "Your mother is smiling down on you, child. You have honored her today." Mrs. Chen appeared with tea and quiet efficiency, and they sat together in the growing darkness, making plans. The wedding would be simple, performed by a circuit judge who rode through Parowan monthly. It would be in 2 weeks, time enough to prepare, but not so long that Thomas could cause trouble. That night, Penelope and Gideon sat again on the porch, this time as an engaged couple rather than friends. The shift in their relationship felt both monumental and completely natural. "Are you sure about this?" Penelope asked quietly. "You are taking on a great deal. My father is a powerful man, and he will not forgive this easily." "I am sure," Gideon said firmly. "Penelope, I want you to understand something. I am not offering you marriage just to save you from your father. These past days, getting to know you, seeing your courage and your heart, I have felt something I have never felt before. I would be honored to build a life with you, not as your rescuer, but as your partner." Penelope felt warmth spread through her chest. "I feel it too," she admitted. "When I am with you, I feel like I can finally breathe, like I can be fully myself without apology." Gideon reached over and took her hand, his fingers lacing through hers. "That is all I want, for both of us to be fully ourselves, together." They sat in comfortable silence, hands joined, looking out at the star-filled sky. Penelope thought of all the years she had spent trying to become someone she was not, all the energy wasted on shame and denial, and she thought of the future stretching before her now, uncertain but full of possibility. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of activity. Sarah helped Penelope sew a wedding dress, a simple but beautiful garment that incorporated traditional Apache patterns in the beadwork. Mrs. Chen cooked and prepared for a small celebration, and Gideon worked on expanding the ranch house to make proper room for a wife. Penelope divided her time between learning from Sarah and helping Gideon with ranch work. She discovered she had a natural way with horses, and Gideon taught her to break them gently rather than harshly, with patience and respect. "You have good instincts," he said one afternoon as they worked with a skittish mare. "You listen to what the horse is telling you rather than just imposing your will." "My mother taught me that all living things deserve respect," Penelope said, surprised at how easily the memory came now. "She said we are all connected, that when we harm one part of creation, we harm ourselves." "Wise woman," Gideon said. "I wish I could have met her." "I wish you could have too," Penelope said. "She would have liked you. You see the value in both worlds, just as she tried to." "Do you think your father will ever accept this?" Gideon asked. Penelope considered the question carefully. "I do not know. Part of me hopes that someday he will see that I am happier being true to myself, but I cannot live my life waiting for his approval. I have done that for too long." As the wedding day approached, word spread through Parowan. The reaction was mixed. Some, like Sarah and a handful of other outcasts and independent spirits, celebrated the union. Others, the respectable townspeople who had courted Thomas Foster's favor, expressed scandal and disapproval. Mrs. Whitmore made a point of crossing the street to avoid Penelope when she came to town for supplies. Harold Thornton spread rumors that Penelope had lost her mind, that she had been corrupted by savage influences. But Penelope found she did not care. Their opinions had no power over her anymore. The night before the wedding, Sarah came to the ranch and performed a blessing ceremony, speaking words in Apache that Penelope half remembered from childhood. She burned sage and sweet grass, and the smoke carried prayers to the ancestors. "Your mother is here with us tonight," Sarah said softly. "I feel her presence. She is so happy, Penelope, so proud of the woman you have become." Tears streamed down Penelope's face, but they were tears of healing rather than grief. I wish she could be here in body, not just spirit. She lives in you, Sarah said, in your courage, in your choices, in the way you honor her memory. That is a kind of immortality. The wedding took place on a brilliant October morning in 1878 with the red rocks glowing in the autumn sunlight. Judge Morrison, a gruff but fair man who had known Gideon since he was a boy, performed the ceremony in Gideon's front yard. Sarah stood as witness along with Mrs. Chin and a few other friends who had made the journey. Penelope wore her dress with pride, the Apache beadwork catching the light. She had left her hair loose and flowing rather than pinned up in the elaborate styles the Academy had favored. And around her neck she wore the turquoise pendant Sarah had returned to her, the one her grandmother had given her so many years ago. Gideon wore a simple suit, his expression solemn and joyful at once. When Judge Morrison asked if he took Penelope to be his wife, his "I do" rang out clear and strong. And when it was Penelope's turn, she looked into Gideon's eyes and spoke her vows without hesitation. "I do." They sealed their marriage with a kiss, and the small gathering erupted in celebration. Mrs. Chin had prepared a feast, and they ate and drank and danced as the sun traced its path across the sky. That night, as man and wife, Gideon and Penelope stood together on their porch and looked out at the land they would build their life upon. Gideon's arm was around her waist, and Penelope leaned into his warmth. "No regrets?" he asked softly. "Not a single one," Penelope replied. "I feel like my life is finally beginning." "Ours," Gideon corrected gently. "Our life is beginning." The first months of marriage were both challenging and wonderful. Penelope threw herself into learning everything she could about running the ranch. She worked alongside Gideon from dawn until dusk, her soft academy hands becoming calloused and strong. She learned to rope cattle, mend fences, manage the household accounts, and 1,000 other practical skills. But more importantly, she continued learning from Sarah. Once a week, they would spend the day in the canyons, and Sarah would share the accumulated wisdom of generations. Penelope learned to identify dozens of medicinal plants, to prepare them properly, to understand the delicate balance of when and how to use them. Word began to spread among the more marginalized members of the community. When the doctor in town refused to treat a Chinese laborer with a broken arm, they brought him to Penelope. When a Paiute family needed help with a difficult childbirth, they sought her out. Slowly, carefully, Penelope began building a practice as a healer, following in her mother's footsteps. Gideon supported her completely, often riding with her to distant homesteads when she was called to help. He never questioned her growing independence or tried to limit her work. Instead, he seemed to take pride in her accomplishments. "You are doing something important," he told her one evening after she had successfully treated a child's fever. "Your mother's knowledge lives on through you." As winter approached, bringing cold winds and occasional snow to the Utah highlands, Penelope and Gideon settled into a rhythm of partnership. They worked side by side during the day and talked long into the nights, sharing stories of their childhoods, their dreams, their hopes for the future. It was during one of these conversations that Penelope first broached the subject that had been weighing on her heart. "Do you think we could have children who would be proud of their heritage? All of it, I mean, not just the parts deemed acceptable by society?" Gideon pulled her closer, his hand warm against her back. "I think we could raise children who understood that their mixed heritage is a strength, not a weakness. Children who knew the stories of all their ancestors, not just the ones society approves of." "I want that," Penelope whispered. "I want to give them what I lost." "Then we will," Gideon promised. "Together." That winter brought unexpected news. Thomas Foster had fallen ill, a fever that would not break despite the town doctor's best efforts. Margaret sent word through an intermediary that Thomas was asking for Penelope. Penelope's first instinct was to refuse. Her father had disowned her after all. But Gideon took her hand and said gently, "The choice is yours, But remember that forgiveness often heals the forgiver as much as the forgiven. After much thought, Penelope agreed to go, but only with Gideon at her side. They rode to her father's ranch through a light snowfall, and Penelope felt her heart heavy with complicated emotions. Thomas looked shrunken in his large bed, his face pale and drawn. Margaret hovered nearby, but it was clear she had finally realized the severity of the situation. When Penelope entered, Thomas's eyes filled with tears. "Penelope," he rasped, "you came." "I came," she confirmed, moving to sit beside the bed. She examined him with her healer's eye, noting the pattern of his symptoms. "How long has he been like this?" "5 days," Margaret said, her usual coldness replaced by genuine fear. "The doctor says there is nothing more he can do." Penelope recognized the illness. It was one Sarah had taught her about, a particular fever that responded to a combination of herbs if caught in time. "I may be able to help," she said carefully, "but I would need to use my mother's methods." Thomas gripped her hand with surprising strength. "Whatever you need. I was a fool, Penelope. I let pride and fear of judgment cloud everything. Your mother was the best person I ever knew, and I dishonored her memory by trying to erase it. Can you forgive me?" The words Penelope had longed to hear for years fell like rain on parched earth. "I can forgive," she said softly, "but I cannot forget. And I will not change who I am or how I live to earn back your approval." "I do not ask you to," Thomas said weakly. "I only ask for a chance to know my daughter as she truly is, not as I tried to make her." Penelope looked at Gideon, who nodded encouragingly. Then she turned back to her father. "Let me get my medicine bag." She worked through the night, preparing careful combinations of herbs, adjusting the doses as her mother had taught her. Gideon stayed beside her, supporting her work, fetching water and firewood as needed. And gradually, impossibly, the fever began to break. By morning, Thomas was sleeping peacefully, his breathing even, and his color improved. Margaret looked at Penelope with something approaching respect for the first time. "You saved his life," she said quietly. Using savage methods, the doctor dismissed. "I use my mother's methods," Penelope corrected firmly. "Knowledge that has been passed down through generations and proven its worth. There is no shame in that." Thomas recovered slowly over the following weeks. Penelope visited regularly, bringing medicines and checking his progress. During these visits, she began to tell him about her mother, sharing memories and stories that had been forbidden for so long. At first, Thomas listened in pained silence, but gradually he began to contribute his own memories, speaking of the woman he had loved and lost. "She was so strong," he said one afternoon, "so certain of herself and her place in the world. I envied that, even as I loved her. And when she died, I think I was angry at her for leaving me to raise you alone, to face the judgment without her strength to lean on." "So you tried to erase her?" Penelope said, understanding beginning to dawn. "I thought I was protecting you," Thomas admitted. "I thought if I could make you acceptable to proper society, you would have an easier life than your mother did. But I see now I was only hurting you and dishonoring her." "You were," Penelope agreed, "but you have the chance to change that now." It was not a quick healing, but it was real. Thomas began making efforts to know his daughter as she truly was. He visited the ranch Penelope shared with Gideon, though he was clearly uncomfortable at first. He listened as Penelope spoke about her healing work, and slowly, painfully, he began to speak of his late first wife with respect rather than shame. Spring came to Utah with a profusion of wildflowers and the promise of new beginnings. Penelope discovered she was pregnant in late March, and the joy she and Gideon felt was boundless. "A child," Gideon said wonderingly, his hand resting gently on her still flat belly. "Our child." "A child who will know all their heritage," Penelope added, "who will be taught the wisdom of their ancestors on all sides." Sarah wept with joy when she heard the news. Your mother's line continues, she said. The knowledge will pass to another generation. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, with Penelope continuing her healing work well into her 6th month before finally agreeing to rest more. Gideon became even more protective, though he was careful not to smother her independence. One warm June evening, as they sat together watching the sunset paint the rocks in shades of gold and crimson, Penelope reflected on how much her life had changed in less than a year. I was so lost, she said softly, so ashamed of who I was. I cannot believe I almost married Harold Thornton and buried myself completely. But you did not, Gideon reminded her. You found your courage and chose a different path. You helped me find it, Penelope corrected. You and Sarah, you showed me it was possible to honor all parts of myself. You would have found it eventually, Gideon said. But I am grateful I could be part of your journey. Penelope leaned against him, content and complete in a way she had never imagined possible. I love you, she said simply. I love you, Gideon replied. More than I ever thought I could love anyone. Their son was born in late November of 1879, a healthy baby with his father's blue eyes and his mother's dark hair. They named him Gabriel, after Gideon's father, with the Apache name Kasumi as his middle name meaning moon. Sarah performed a blessing ceremony, welcoming Gabriel into the world with prayers in Apache and Paiute. Thomas attended, standing quietly in the back, and Penelope saw tears on his weathered cheeks. After the ceremony, Thomas approached his daughter and grandson. May I? He asked hesitantly. Penelope placed Gabriel in her father's arms, watching as Thomas looked down at the baby with wonder. He looks like your mother, Thomas said softly. Around the eyes. Good, Penelope said firmly. I want him to carry her forward. Tell him about her, Thomas said, looking up at his daughter. Tell him all the things I tried to make you forget. He should know the strength and wisdom that runs in his blood. I will, Penelope promised. And so should you. You knew her best. It was the beginning of a new chapter in their complicated relationship. Thomas became a regular presence in Gabriel's life, and through his grandson, he began to make peace with the mistakes of his past. The years that followed were full and rich. Gideon's ranch prospered, not because he compromised his values, but because his fair dealings and quality stock earned him a solid reputation. Penelope's healing practice grew, and she became known throughout the region as someone with knowledge the town doctors lacked. They had 2 more children, a daughter named Patricia Rose, with the Apache name Chuli, meaning mountain in 1881, and another son named Gregory James with the Apache name Bidziel, meaning he is strong in 1883. Each child was raised to honor all aspects of their heritage, learning traditional skills alongside practical ranching knowledge. Penelope taught her children her mother's language, the stories of their ancestors, the ways of healing and harmony with the land. And Gideon taught them to ride and rope, to work with integrity, to stand firm in who they were regardless of others' judgment. The children grew up free of the shame that had marked Penelope's own childhood. They moved easily between worlds, comfortable in their mixed heritage, proud of all their ancestors. When other children teased them or adults looked down on them, they had the confidence to hold their heads high. Sarah remained a constant presence, teaching the children as she had taught Penelope, ensuring the old ways were not lost. Mrs. Chin continued to run the household with quiet efficiency, becoming a beloved part of their family. Even Thomas transformed in his later years. He became an advocate for fairer treatment of the native peoples in the territory, using his influence to push back against some of the worst injustices. It did not undo the harm of his earlier years, but it was something. One evening in the spring of 1890, when Gabriel was 10, Patricia was 8, and Gregory was 6, the family gathered on the porch as they often did. The children were supposed to be preparing for bed, but they had begged for one more story. Sarah, now elderly but still sharp as ever, told them about their grandmother, about her skill as a healer, and her courage in facing a world that often showed her cruelty. The children listened with rapt attention, their faces glowing in the lamplight. After the story ended and the children were finally tucked into bed, Penelope and Gideon sat together in their familiar spot on the porch. 12 years had passed since that first meeting in Parowan, since Penelope had been a lost young woman drowning in shame. Do you ever regret it? Penelope asked, though she knew the answer. Marrying someone who came with so many complications? Gideon pulled her close, his arm around her shoulders. Not for a single moment. You brought me more joy and meaning than I ever imagined possible. You gave me children I am proud of and a partnership I treasure. How could I regret any of that? I used to think I had to choose, Penelope reflected, between my mother's world and my father's world, between honor and acceptance. But you taught me I could forge my own path. We taught each other, Gideon corrected. We built something new together, taking the best of both worlds and leaving behind the worst. From inside the house came the sound of Patricia practicing the flute Sarah had made for her, the notes floating out into the night. It was a traditional instrument, played in a style passed down through generations, and the sound of it filled Penelope's heart with profound gratitude. She has your mother's gift for music, Gideon observed. And Gabriel has your way with horses, Penelope added. And Gregory has both our stubborn determination. They laughed together, comfortable in the life they had built. It had not been easy. There were still people in Parowan who looked down on their family, still moments when prejudice and small-mindedness reared their heads. But Penelope had learned that she could not control others' opinions, only her own response to them. The next morning brought a surprise visitor. Harold Thornton arrived at the ranch, looking considerably older and less self-assured than Penelope remembered. He had married a woman from a wealthy family in Salt Lake City, but rumor had it the marriage was cold and his business dealings had suffered from his reputation for harsh cruelty. Miss Foster, he began, then corrected himself. Mrs. Quaid, I apologize for arriving unannounced. Mr. Thornton, Penelope replied coolly. What brings you here? Harold shifted uncomfortably. I came to ask for your help. My son is ill, and the doctors in Salt Lake City have been unable to help him. I heard you had some success with difficult cases. Penelope studied him carefully, remembering the man who had once dismissed her heritage as savage nonsense. You want me to use my mother's methods? The ones you found so distasteful? Harold had the grace to look ashamed. I was wrong. About many things. My pride has cost me dearly over the years. But my son should not suffer for my mistakes. Will you help him? Penelope looked at Gideon, who nodded. Despite everything, she had become a healer, and healers help those in need, regardless of personal feelings. Tell me about his symptoms. She traveled to Salt Lake City with Harold, bringing her medicines and her knowledge. His son was 7 years old, a pale, quiet child suffering from respiratory problems exacerbated by the city's poor air quality. Penelope treated him with a combination of herbs and practical advice about changes to his environment. As the boy improved over several days, Harold watched Penelope work with something like awe. I thought your ways were primitive, he admitted one evening. I could not have been more wrong. Your knowledge is sophisticated and effective in ways our modern medicine is not. It is different knowledge, Penelope replied. Both have value, but dismissing centuries of accumulated wisdom as primitive only reveals one's own ignorance. Harold flinched at the rebuke, but nodded. You could have refused to help me, after how I treated you, how I spoke about your mother's people. Why did you come? Because I am a healer, Penelope said simply. And because I will not let my children see me become the bitter, prejudiced person you were. I want them to see that we help those in need, even when it is difficult, even when we have cause to refuse. When she returned home, her children rushed to greet her, full of questions about the city and the sick boy. Penelope told them about the case, about choosing compassion over resentment, and saw understanding dawn in their young faces. That night, lying in bed beside Gideon, Penelope reflected on how far she had come from the frightened, ashamed young woman who had fled her father's house. She had rebuilt herself from the foundation up, claiming her heritage and her power, refusing to be diminished by others' prejudices. "You are remarkable," Gideon said softly in the darkness. "The way you handle everything with such grace and strength." "I learned from the best," Penelope replied. "My mother, Sarah, you. You all showed me what it means to live with integrity." "Our children are lucky to have you as their mother," Gideon said. "Our children are lucky to have both of us," Penelope corrected. "We are building something important together. A family that honors all of its roots, that takes pride in its complexity rather than being ashamed of it." The years continued to pass, each one bringing new challenges and new joys. Gabriel grew into a thoughtful young man with a gift for training horses. Patricia developed into a skilled musician and storyteller, keeping the old tales alive for a new generation. Gregory showed promise as both a rancher and a healer, interested in learning everything his parents could teach him. Thomas lived long enough to see his grandchildren grow into capable, confident young people. On his deathbed in 1895, he called Penelope to his side one final time. "I wasted so many years," he said weakly, "fighting against the very things that made your mother special, trying to erase the beauty of what we had created together." "But you found your way back," Penelope reminded him gently. "You made peace with it in the end." "Because of you," Thomas said. "You had the courage I lacked. You honored your mother when I tried to forget her." "Thank you for that, Penelope. Thank you for being stronger than your father." He died peacefully that night, and Penelope mourned him with complicated grief. He had hurt her deeply, but he had also tried to make amends. She chose to remember his last years rather than his failures, another act of grace in a life built on choosing compassion. Margaret surprised everyone by reaching out to Penelope after Thomas's death. Without his influence, she seemed smaller and less certain. "I was cruel to you," she admitted. "I was frightened of anything that challenged my narrow view of the world, and I took that fear out on you. Can you forgive me?" Penelope considered the request carefully. Forgiveness did not mean forgetting, but it did mean releasing the poison of old resentments. "I can forgive," she said finally. "But I hope you will learn from your mistakes as my father tried to do." As Penelope moved into middle age, her reputation as a healer grew beyond the immediate region. People traveled from all over Utah Territory to seek her help, and she trained several apprentices, ensuring her mother's knowledge would continue to spread. Sarah passed away peacefully in 1898, surrounded by the family she had helped Penelope build. Her last words to Penelope were, "Your mother is so proud. You have honored her beyond measure." Penelope grieved deeply, but also felt profound gratitude. Sarah had been the bridge that connected her to her heritage, the guide who had helped her find her way back to herself. She made sure Sarah was buried with full honors, combining Apache traditions with the respect Sarah deserved from the broader community. By 1900, Gabriel was 20 and courting a young woman of mixed Paiute and European descent. Patricia was 18 and had developed a reputation as a teacher, instructing children from all backgrounds. Gregory was 16 and already showing the skills that would make him a successful rancher and healer. One evening that summer, the whole family gathered for dinner, including Gabriel's sweetheart Maria and several close family friends. The table was loud with laughter and conversation, multiple languages blending together naturally. After dinner, as the younger generation cleaned up, Gideon and Penelope walked out to their familiar spot on the porch. They were both showing signs of age now, silver threading through their hair, lines around their eyes from years of sun and laughter. "Do you remember the first time we stood here together?" Gideon asked, taking Penelope's hand. "I was so lost," Penelope said, "so full of shame and confusion. I did not know who I was or who I wanted to be." "And now?" Gideon prompted. Penelope looked back at the house full of family, heard the sounds of her children's laughter, felt the weight of all she had learned and accomplished. "Now I know exactly who I am. I am my mother's daughter and my father's daughter. I am Apache and European. I am a healer and a rancher's wife. I am a mother and a teacher. I am all of these things at once, and there is no shame in any of it. You found your honor again, Gideon said softly. The honor they tried to steal from you. We found it together, Penelope corrected. You stood beside me when I needed someone to believe I was worth standing beside. You showed me that I did not have to choose between parts of myself. You gave me the space and support to become whole. Gideon pulled her close, and they stood together, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. 22 years had passed since that day in Parawan, when a lost young woman had fled her father's house, and a kind cowboy had offered her shelter and respect. I love you, Gideon said, as he had said countless times over the years, more with each passing day. I love you, Penelope replied. You helped me find honor when I had lost it. You helped me become who I was always meant to be. Inside the house, Patricia began playing her flute again, a haunting melody that drifted out into the night. Gabriel's voice joined in, singing words in Apache that his mother had taught him, words his grandmother had taught her. Gregory added harmony, and Maria laughed with delight at the beauty of it. Penelope listened to the music of her family, this blended, complicated, beautiful family she and Gideon had created together. They had built something precious here, something that honored all their ancestors while creating something entirely new. The years ahead would bring more challenges, she knew. The world was changing rapidly as the new century began, but she was no longer the frightened young woman who had been ashamed of her heritage. She was strong and certain, rooted in the wisdom of her ancestors and confident in the life she had chosen. Gabriel married Maria the following spring, in a ceremony that blended traditions from multiple cultures. Penelope and Gideon stood together watching their son begin his own journey of building a family that honored all its roots. 2 years later, Patricia married a schoolteacher from Parawan who had courted her for years, a kind man who loved her music and her spirit. When Gabriel and Maria had their first child in 1903, a daughter they named Sarah in honor of the woman who had guided the family, Penelope held her granddaughter and felt the circle complete. This child would never know the shame Penelope had experienced. She would grow up celebrated for all her heritage, taught the wisdom of all her ancestors. Gregory chose to remain on the family ranch, working alongside his aging father and developing his own healing practice. He never married, content with his work and his family around him. As Penelope moved into her 50s and then her 60s, she gradually passed her healing knowledge to the next generation. Gregory became the primary healer, though people still sought out Penelope for the most difficult cases. Her reputation had grown so much that even the town doctor consulted with her regularly, having learned to respect the knowledge she carried. Gideon's ranch prospered through good times and bad, built on the foundation of fair dealing and quality work. He and Penelope had never become wealthy in the way her father had been, but they had built something more valuable. They had built a life of integrity, a family that honored its complexity, a legacy of healing and wisdom. One evening in 1910, when Penelope was 52 and Gideon 56, they sat together on their porch as they had done countless times before. Penelope's dark hair was heavily streaked with silver now, and Gideon moved a bit more slowly, but the love between them had only deepened with time. I was thinking about your mother today, Gideon said, wishing she could have seen all this. The family you have built, the work you have done carrying forward her knowledge. I think she sees, Penelope said softly. Sometimes I feel her presence so strongly, especially when I am working with herbs or teaching the grandchildren. Sarah used to say the ancestors are always with us, watching over us. I believe that. She would be so proud of you, Gideon said, not just for the healing work, but for the courage it took to reclaim what was stolen from you, to stand up and say, this is who I am, with pride instead of shame. I could not have done it without you, Penelope said, leaning against him. You were the first person to show me that I could honor all parts of myself. You gave me the safety to become whole again. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun painted the familiar red rocks in shades of gold and crimson. Around them, the ranch bustled with activity. Gabriel was teaching his young daughter to ride. Patricia had brought her children for a visit and was showing them how to weave baskets in the traditional way. Gregory was tending to a patient in the healing room he had built onto the house. "We built something good here," Gideon said. "Something that will outlast us." "We built something that honors all our ancestors," Penelope agreed, "and teaches our children and grandchildren that there is no shame in being exactly who they are." As darkness fell and the stars emerged, the family gathered inside for dinner. The table was crowded and loud, 3 generations sharing food and stories and laughter. Penelope looked around at these faces she loved, these people who carried forward the legacy of all their ancestors, and felt complete. Later that night, lying in bed beside Gideon, Penelope reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From the ashamed young woman on the stage in Parowan to the confident healer and matriarch she had become. From the girl who had been taught to hide half of herself to the woman who celebrated all of who she was. "Thank you," she whispered to Gideon in the darkness. "For what?" he murmured sleepily. "For everything. For seeing me when I could not see myself. For standing beside me when it would have been easier to walk away. For helping me find honor again when I had been taught only shame." Gideon pulled her closer, his hand warm against her back. "Thank you for trusting me enough to be vulnerable. For building this life with me. For showing our children what strength and grace look like. For being exactly who you are." They fell asleep in each other's arms, as they had done for more than 30 years. Two people who had found each other at exactly the right moment and built something beautiful together. The years continued their steady march forward. More grandchildren arrived, each one welcomed with the same blend of traditions that had marked Gabriel's birth. Penelope continued her healing work until her hands grew too stiff with age, then supervised Gregory and the apprentices he trained, ensuring the knowledge continued to flow. In 1918, when the great influenza swept through the region, Penelope's healing knowledge saved many lives. At 70 years old, she worked tirelessly alongside Gregory, using combinations of traditional remedies and modern medical knowledge to treat the sick. The town doctor, now a younger man who had grown up respecting Penelope's expertise, worked closely with her, and together they saved far more people than would have survived otherwise. It was during this time that the town formally recognized Penelope's contributions, presenting her with a certificate of appreciation at a public ceremony. Standing before the gathered crowd, Penelope spoke about her mother, about the Apache traditions that had given her the knowledge to help, about the importance of honoring all forms of wisdom rather than dismissing what we do not understand. "My mother's people developed sophisticated medical knowledge over thousands of years," she said clearly. "When I was young, I was taught to be ashamed of that heritage, but that shame nearly cost me everything valuable. It is only by reclaiming my full heritage, by honoring all my ancestors, that I was able to become who I was meant to be. I hope the young people here today will remember that there is no shame in being exactly who you are, in claiming all your heritage with pride." The applause that followed was genuine and warm. Times had begun to change, slowly, and while prejudice had not disappeared, there was growing recognition that the old ways of dismissing entire cultures was both wrong and foolish. Gideon passed away peacefully in the spring of 1920 at the age of 66. He died as he had lived, with quiet dignity and surrounded by family. His last words to Penelope were simple. "Best decision I ever made was asking you to marry me. Best life I could have imagined." Penelope mourned him deeply, missing his steady presence and gentle humor. But she also celebrated the life they had built together, the family they had raised, the legacy they were leaving. She wore a widow's black, but around her neck she wore both the silver cross from the academy and her grandmother's turquoise pendant, symbols of the journey she had traveled. She lived another 12 years, watching her grandchildren grow and have children of their own. She taught the great-grandchildren the stories of their ancestors, made sure they knew about their great-grandmother, who had been a healer, about their great-great-grandfather, who had been a cowboy with the courage to stand against prejudice. In 1932, Penelope Foster Quaid passed away at the age of 84, surrounded by 4 generations of family. She died in the house Gideon had built for her, on land they had worked together, having lived a life of meaning and purpose. At her funeral, people came from all over the region, former patients and their families, students she had taught, people whose lives had been touched by her healing work and her quiet courage. Gregory spoke about his mother's legacy, about how she had taught them to honor all their ancestors, to take pride in their complex heritage, to stand firm in who they were. My mother was taught to be ashamed, he said, his voice breaking slightly. They tried to make her deny half of who she was, but she found the courage to reclaim her honor with the help of my father, who saw her true worth when others could not. Together, they built something precious, a family that celebrates all its roots, a tradition of healing that honors ancient wisdom, a legacy of courage and integrity. We stand here today as living proof that there is no shame in being exactly who we are. They buried Penelope next to Gideon on a hillside overlooking the ranch they had built together, with red rock cliffs rising in the distance and the vast Utah sky overhead. The ceremony blended traditions from all her heritage, honoring the complexity that had defined her life. Years later, her great-great-grandchildren would still tell the story of Penelope Foster Quaid, the woman who had been taught shame but chose honor instead. They would speak of how she reclaimed her heritage, how a kind cowboy had helped her find her way, how together they had built something that lasted far beyond their own lives. The healing knowledge she had carried forward continued through the generations. The stories she had kept alive were still told. The courage she had shown in standing up for herself continued to inspire her descendants to be exactly who they were without apology. And in the Red Rock country of Utah, on a ranch that had been in the family for generations, her legacy lived on in the faces of children who knew all their ancestors' names, who took pride in their complex heritage, who understood that true honor comes from embracing all of who you are rather than hiding parts away. Penelope's journey from shame to honor became a story told and retold, a reminder that it is never too late to reclaim what was stolen, to stand up and say, "This is who I am," with pride, to build a life of integrity and meaning. And at the heart of that story was the love between a lost young woman and a cowboy who saw her worth, who stood beside her, who helped her find her way back to herself. They had made her ashamed of ancestors she should honor. The cowboy had helped her find honor again. And in doing so, they had built something beautiful together, a legacy of love and courage that would endure for generations.